This is TWiT. All right, Section 230, which we have all agreed is.
I just like the sound effect.
I know.
Every time you say that, is that Jeff or is that just a machine that you press?
I wish it were a machine. I don't really need the button though. I could push Jeff's buttons with just a few words.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
And you know, it hurts me because it's the bill. Here's Mike Masnick's Tech Dirt take: is a dumpster fire of cluelessness.
It's great analysis.
File.
He always does them, but this is beyond even a Masnick standard.
Mark Warner has introduced a new Section 230 reform bill. Just briefly, I think everybody who listens knows, because we talk about it a lot, Section 230 is the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, which essentially, what is it, the 23 words that created the Internet?
26.
It's a beautiful in its minimalism, but it essentially says that if you are Twitter or Facebook or Leo Laporte, you are a platform, not a publisher. You cannot be held liable for the speech on your chat room, on your blog comments on Facebook or Twitter, and moderating them does not make you a publisher. You do not have the onus of being a publisher just because you moderate the content. The fact that you could, in fact, quite quickly, anybody sues you if somebody sues me for something somebody says in my chat room, and people have threatened, and I go to court, all I have to say is, Your Honor, Section 230 protects me, and it's summarily dismissed. It's a real protection against those kinds of frivolous lawsuits, and it makes it possible to have blog comments and Facebook and Twitter and a chat room and all of that. So just quickly, and if you want to know more, there's a wonderful page on Section 230 on techdirt.com it says, you've been forwarded here because you're clueless about 230. I think we should all send links to Mark Warner and Amy Klobuchar and Mazie Hirono, the senators who are sponsoring the Safe Tech Act, Safeguarding Against Fraud, Exploitation, Threats, Extremism, and Consumer Harms Act. Masnick says it's one of the worst Section 230 bills I've seen, and we've seen some bad ones.
Really awful ones.
There's a lot of things bad. For instance, it takes that defense that 230 provides against lawsuit from an affirmative defense to a defense, to kind of like fair use. So you would still have to go to court, and you would have to defend yourself. You'd have to pay a lawyer. And then, yes, you know, the biggest, most consequential change, according to Masnick, is it takes the famous 26 words of the current law, removes the protections entirely if money changes hands, in other words, advertising, and then it changes it from an immunity to a merely affirmative defense. So I got that backwards. It's not an affirmative defense now. It's an immunity. Right. It would become an affirmative defense. But he says that it basically wipes out all of the benefits of 230.
So
go ahead, Mike.
Let me just take a devil's advocacy, and I've actually been dying to talk to Jeff about this for a long time. But
good. Then Owen and I will sit back.
Here's a question. So
I brought an apple.
So let's start with a basic free speech trope. Okay, yelling fire in a crowded theater. Okay, if you do that, that's not protected speech because you're putting people in danger. If somebody whispers to you that there's a fire in a theater, and you say, he said there's a fire to the whole theater, then the amplifier is the person liable. Now let's take this to Facebook. I agree that just allowing somebody to publish something, a social network like Twitter or Facebook should not be held liable. But if they amplify it, in other words, if a source of content that has 100 people subscribing says something, and then Facebook's algorithms redirects it from the 100 people and sends it to 1 million people, should Facebook not be liable for that amplification?
So let me, a few things on this. One is that there is a bill from Tom Malinowski, who happens to be my representative in New Jersey, that tries to do that tries to say, if you amplify is when you're going to get in trouble. Because everybody's trying to slice 230 like it's a bologna. I'll take this slice off, you take that slice off, right? So Fosta Sesta took off the child porn and sex trafficking slice. Somebody wants to take off the amplification slice. Somebody wants to take off this slice. That's what it's going to get sliced down to nothing, honey. But so there are variants of that. But the problems then become a fewfold. One, define what's bad, right? What's the bad speech? What's the problem? We're gonna litigate that like crazy. So two, Mike Masnick himself said, if this law passes, he has to shut down TechDirt, because the harassment cost to you to then fight over these legal issues will be such that you will allow no one outside to do anything that might get you in trouble. So I listened for the 87th time to Joe Scarborough. I wake up at 8 o'clock, before 8 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, I turn on the TV and there's Joe Scarborough yelling about Section 230. I want to sue Facebook. I want to sue
Oh, really?
Twitter.
He's against 230.
Finally,
I knew I didn't watch that show for a reason.
He voted for it.
Right. So 230 was Ron Wyden's addition to the CDA.
Yes.
Very specifically to protect the internet. I mean, he knew exactly what he was doing.
No, I'd go even farther. It was even smarter than that, Leo. It was brilliant legislation because it was to protect the public conversation.
That's
because if you didn't
better
have
way of
230,
putting it. Yes.
You end up with one of two extremes. Either there's no public conversation because nobody wants to be liable, or there's really, really crappy public conversation. Everything is parlor because you don't want to moderate it because you become more liable. It's all about liability. So I made a video, by the way, to Joe Scarborough on YouTube. A little 5-minute video. I put it up on the rundown, and he called. To his credit, he called.
Yeah.
And he said he's going to order Jeff Kossoff's book, which I recommend to you all, which is the 26 Words That Created the Internet. I said, have on Jeff Kossoff, have on Mike Masnick, have on Daphne Keller and lawyers who really understand this stuff. But please have someone on to explain this to you, because the emotional aspect here is, somebody should sue them. Somebody should sue Facebook out of business. Well, yeah, that may well happen. And with you, when you sue Facebook and Twitter out of business, you also take with it Black Lives Matter and Me Too. And you take with it the voices who were never heard in mass media. So mass media is delighted with this. Murdoch would love this too, by the way, because it gets rid of all of that cacophony that I would call democracy and they call noise. That's the problem, Mike, is that you by emotionally wanting to go after liability here, for what reason? For what end? Just because you want to punish somebody? That's what this is about.
Personally,
and then it takes with it a lot of other things.
Yeah, personally, I think that one of the reasons, so there's been the great canceling, or whatever you want to call it, where all the social networks got rid of all the QAnon people and got rid of Trump and got rid of all this stuff.
Which 230 allows them to do, very importantly. That's why the right doesn't want 230, because 230 protected them in doing so.
My fear is, I think people don't appreciate certain aspects of democracy or free speech. One of the aspects of democracy people don't appreciate is that by having everybody involved, they're inside the tent instead of outside trying to destroy the system. And same thing with free speech. You want everybody to be free to speak as much as possible, but I feel like the amplification, the automated amplification, and the ability to game the algorithms.
Mike, what are we doing right now?
Yeah, exactly.
What are we doing? We're amplifying things right now, right?
Yes,
so we're doing that, right? That's what media has always done. That's just what media has done for a long time. It amplifies.
Well, yeah.
Emilio, the editor of the Chronicle, decides what to put in the Chronicle. Owen, the business editor, decides what to put in the business section. They amplify. It's what media has always done.
A human does that, but a human is very difficult to game in the same way. So you have this.
There's an industry called PR built to do that.
Well, you have InfoWars and all these who are devoted to the project of figuring out how to game algorithms while nobody's paying attention and have all these runaway things. Then you have the Facebook recommendation engine. Facebook itself did a study to find out what the number one reason is why people join extremist groups, and the number one reason was Facebook was explicitly recommending those groups to people. And then they got rid of, said, okay, well, don't do anything about it. Mark Zuckerberg himself personally said, no, don't take action on this. Just let this keep happening. Then they got caught and they changed it and all that stuff. But my point is that I would love to see people be able to have the bubble of free speech to be much larger, to have more extreme content, but not have that content amplified and converting people into extremists.
But the other version of that, Mike, is so then you end up with a world of billboards. Then this notion that there's some kind of definition of neutrality out there where they're not allowed to select things on the basis of what they know about me. Then all I have is a huge river of crap. What Facebook does, in fact, do is to try to find the things that I'm more interested in. Now, that gets demonized. Like, they made Jarvis into a radical. He didn't used to scream like this. It was only because of Facebook that he does this, right? And that's the argument that's made. Believe me, I've always done this. So it gets demonized, but in fact, it's a service. It's relevance. Mass media was a one-size-fits-all product. We've lived there. I've had that. I don't think it's any damn good. And the other problem here is that there's this presumption that, oh my God, Facebook's a cesspool, it's awful, horrible things happen. The numbers don't back that up. The numbers, the research doesn't back that up. We're not in filter bubbles. We're not as bad as it seems. Now, what we do want from the platforms is data to researchers to understand what the impact is. We need that, and I'll argue strenuously for that, but we don't know right now. And so there's a lot of emotional presumption that something must be done. 230 is the cause of all of our ills. Before 230, we were a great country. We weren't racist at all. Bullshit.
Well, is the free market, taking care of this? Because sleeping giants and other activists have called Facebook and Google to account for the extremism on their services. And part of the reaction was that large advertisers, at least for a time, boycotted Facebook and YouTube in particular. I don't think that really took a chunk out of their earnings, though. So I'm not sure if that's really going to be, the thing that reins them in.
It didn't. I mean, look. Well, but here's a better example of it right now. Is that Lou Dobbs was on Fox networks for a long time. What forced him off? Somebody suing. Now I look at that and I hate Murdoch and I hate Fox, so I say, oh, goody. But there is a concern there. A look at the Peter Thiel site, suit against Gawker, right? And so we can see.
I'm not familiar with the incident.
Have you ever heard of that, Gawker?
Exactly.
What is? Owen was the editor-in-chief of Valleywag. Was it?
Give me that perspective.
Was it in that time frame? Was the Thiel lawsuit related to your work?
It was years after I left, but it was directly related to some posts I wrote.
Right.
Did you out Peter?
Peter Thiel was publicly known to be gay in a very large circle.
We should point out you're gay as well, so.
Which doesn't give me a special right to to write about one's sexual orientation, but the thing I wrote back then was that people in Silicon Valley are being very weird and touchy when I bring up this topic, and it seems unenlightened to treat gayness as something forbidden that we can't talk about.
Right.
When many people know,
right,
that Peter Thiel is gay. Many people know that I'm gay. I don't need to broadcast it and say I'm out for it to be okay. I feel like coming out is something we do for. We don't need to
relitigate that, but I just do want to thank you for putting Gawker out of business.
Owen, I would like to hear though is that because that's I think the point where I was headed here, and I'm glad you're here for a million reasons and all the history you bring, and you bring that I'm sure difficult history, but if you don't mind, talk for a minute about the legal chill that you lived through, that your colleagues lived through, and what do you think that even that alone, just that suit, has done to the business?
Absolutely. I mean, to be clear, I left Gawker Media in 2009. The lawsuit was, I believe, 6 years later, and we didn't learn. No one involved learned of Peter Thiel's involvement in funding the lawsuit. It was a lawsuit by Hulk Hogan against Gawker.
It wasn't about Thiel, right?
No,
completely different post.
Yeah.
And
he just funded.
Peter Thiel used a strategy called litigation financing just to harm Gawker, not because he was interested in.
And that's shameful. That's really appalling.
Yeah. He had no particular interest in Hulk Hogan except that privacy lawsuit was a vehicle for him.
Right.
And I think it's a very real chill Gawker filed for bankruptcy because of particular quirks of Florida law and the way that, a decision basically had to be immediately paid out before an appeal was heard.
Wow.
And, again, this was part of like a deliberate strategy to place the lawsuit in Florida so that they could go down this path. And, we think of the United States as having fairly media-friendly laws, but the fact that, a lawsuit like this can be pursued, even though it was, Gawker believed it could be overturned on appeal, meaning that it, the original decision was not sound. It's scary. And, let's go back to Mike Masnick talking about the legal risk from overturning Section 230. He's basically saying his website could not operate because because the legal uncertainty is just too great.
Right.
And I think
too small.
I wouldn't have a chat room. We wouldn't have comments. We wouldn't have a forum for the same reason.
Have a dump button for me when I say anything.
I definitely have to get it. I would just eliminate all other hosts. No, it's more than fanciful. It is a chilling effect, and I'm actually thrilled that you're here, Owen, because that you have direct experience of exactly the kind of thing we're talking about, and it put Gawker out of business. And I'm being facetious, about it, but that wasn't.
You would have to judge the risk.
Yeah.
I mean, if Owen now working for the Chronicle, they have really good lawyers. They have a lot of experience at doing this. They're on the one hand they're richer to go after, on the other hand they're harder to go after.
Well, it's that regulatory regulatory capture again. Facebook probably could defend itself against this new bill. I couldn't, or wouldn't.
Well, Facebook would have to change. The algorithms would go in and become even stupider, because if you used a word like Nazi,
you just have to cut that
they
right
would
out.
Fear that you were going to be accusing someone of that,
right,
or thief, or pick a bad word that could be said about someone.
So I think
they're going to try to cut it all out.
What is the likelihood of this passing? We've seen a lot of Section 230 attacks over the last 6 months.
It's not this one. It's the combination of the pincer of both the right and left going after them for their own reasons.
It's the cluelessness. It's the lack of understanding.
It's not a hard law to understand.
Yeah.
Nobody gets it.
Yeah.
Masnick just tears his hair out explaining it 100 times.
I will save
Jeff Gossip.
I will save the antitrust bill for Wednesday. We'll talk about it on Wednesday because we're
oh, thanks. My blood pressure's too high.
I don't want to kill Jeff.